What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Samuel Richards here, Common Sense Bodybuilding Classic Coaching on Instagram. The Common Sense Coach. We have our coaching services live up and running. We're not doing monthly services yet, but we are running one-off consultations, 1 hour, 2 hours. Get your time with me, talk about anything you want, from blood work to training, anything. Literally, it's your time to use. But today we're going to be talking about a specific issue and the most annoying excuse, in my opinion, in the whole of bodybuilding. That's right, we're talking genetics. What makes up good and bad genetics? Is there anything we can do about them? And how much do they actually matter in practice? All of that will be answered today, so without further ado, let's get into it. So put quite simply, genetics are the biological traits we inherit from our family history, our parents, their parents before that. Genetics dictate everything from eye colour through to the chances of you getting cancer. So, yeah, it's a bit of a spectrum. First and foremost, we're going to cover the genetic factors that go into whether you have good or bad genetics and how much those dictate your propensities for success within bodybuilding. First of all, we're going to kick it off with a fairly obvious one, bone structure. Bone structure is stuff like your clavicle width, your shoulder width, how broad are you, how is your body made up basically? Does it sort of work for bodybuilding? Generally speaking, a larger frame means more potential, more possibility, but it's also often harder to fill out a larger frame. Now, somebody who's maybe at an average height with a large frame is going to do extremely well, but somebody who's really, really tall will have that bit of a harder time because not just the height they've got to contend with, but they've also got a large width to fill out. Now, point number 2 of genetics is muscle insertions, muscle bellies. Muscle insertions are where basically the muscle attaches into that bone structure. So, for example, my arm, if you look here, some people have a bicep which attaches right at the elbow there. Some people, like myself, when you tense, you've got a decent couple of fingers gap between the bicep and the elbow. Now that's a good sign of, say, for example, poor genetics. If you've got a short attachment, which means there's not much surface area for the bicep to grow on, you've got a bigger genetic, propensity to grow a peak because there's, a shorter attachment, shorter surface area, more mass, it's going to get peakier, but generally speaking, a larger, longer insertion works better. Some, for example, also have a large separation between their chest. That in my mind is an insertion. It's not really something you can help. It's just where the muscles attach to the bone. The muscle bellies in my mind is how the muscle sits on that foot frame. So this may be deeply connected to insertions. It may be that shorter the insersions, the more bubbly, your muscle. I think that's very much the case for myself. People with longer insertions, for example, there's more surface area. It's harder for that to be round, to pop out really. More than often it tends to be sort of flatter. So you see people with, for example, quads which are fairly straight down versus people with really flared out quads. I believe that's to do with the insertions, the muscle bellies, how the muscle naturally grows. Point number 3 for genetics is training response. This is fairly self-explanatory, right? But I am going to roll sort of natural musculature into this category because, in my opinion, most people who are naturally muscular played a lot of sport when they're younger. They tend to be the active types. So in my mind, that just suggests a really good response to training. Even if you're doing something like an endurance sport, these people can grow a large amount of muscle naturally. And that, in my opinion, is just a hyper training response. They respond way better than somebody else doing the same activity who doesn't get massive. Generally, this just suggests that somebody adapts better after training. Their muscle adapts more to the training response. So somebody goes in, lifts 4 plates, gets a PB maybe, that person's muscle will adapt quicker than the other person whose muscle doesn't. This, generally speaking, will lead to a larger muscle mass because those adaptations result in muscle mass accrual to compensate for the additional load. Now, there are many, many factors here. People execute training differently. People have different quality of training, different techniques of training. But I do believe that there are just some people who would respond differently to the same training stimulus, the same intensity, the same form than each other. The next point is body fat. This refers to both the rate of accumulation and how it's distributed. Some people distribute body fat perfectly evenly throughout their body. Some people hold it more in their stomach, their back, wherever it might be. They have, generally speaking, places where fat tends to accrue the most. And some people, for example, have an ability to stay leaner than other people. And that's the difference in their ability to accumulate body fat. Some of this is also based on gender, I believe. Women do gain fat and hold it differently than men. But still, there are other factors at play if we're speaking strictly in terms of men's bodybuilding. This factor is going to be a juicy one because it's response to performance-enhancing drugs. Some people jump on the sauce and within a couple of months to a year maybe, they've gone from men's physique to classic to open. They just rapidly grow and grow and grow after that stimulus is added. Different people respond to drugs differently. We know this. This is pharmacology. This is basic shit. Different people's bodies process things at different rates, with different doses, with different efficacies. It's just unfortunately a part of the game. Some also respond to different compounds differently. You know, as with the drug world, some people will do better with paracetamol versus ibuprofen. It's the same with compounds. Some people may not get on with primobolan. It may be far too much of an AI for them. Some people may be absolutely fine. It hardly acts as an AI. Maybe they have a better response, maybe the other person does, but basically different people respond to different compounds in different ways, hence why the harshest compounds, like Tren for example, often just can't be run by people because they respond so violently to it, it ain't worth it. So genetic response to PEDs covers stuff like aromatization rates, your chances of sort of having health impacts, I guess, and how many milligrams you need to use, you know, how quickly, how dramatically do you respond to the same amount of milligrams as somebody else. Speaking of health impacts, health is also a genetic factor. So this both relates to the health side effects of anabolic androgenic steroids or performance enhancing drugs in general. Different people respond in different ways, different people are affected in different ways, medically speaking or health-wise. But also it relates to genetic conditions. So as I alluded to earlier, about to get depressing, some people have cancer running through their family, some people have heart issues, some people have genetic, illnesses of other forms. And obviously if you have a bad response to anabolics health-wise, and you have this predisposition to poor health, it's a recipe for disaster. So those are most of the factors. I'm sure there are countless other factors, but we don't have time to dissect the helix and figure out exactly what's going to affect it. I'm sure there's myostat and all that kind of stuff, but you don't need to know about that. You barely need to know about this. But what you all want to know is how do you assess your own genetics? Or some of it's way simpler than others. I'll quickly give you the simple stuff. So for example, health will show in blood tests, scans, in your family history. You're going to know if you're healthy, if you get a blood test or a scan, and you're taking stuff, and it says you're not healthy or you are. And you're going to know if you've got genetic defects in your family because they're your family. Drug response is pretty damn apparent also. How did you respond to testosterone? Did you blow up? Did you not? Were you slightly disappointed? Training response, again, obvious. If you're doing all the things right, which I almost guarantee you're not, because most people aren't, and you're still not growing at the same rate as other people, or maybe you're training with the same people in exactly the same ways, you're not getting the same response, there you go, maybe you're not got a very good genetic response to training. Body fat distribution, ideally it's even. Ideally there's not much of it. That's your answer. Obviously there's other factors health-wise that can play a part in that, but again, I'm not going to bore you with that. We've got limited time here. Bone structure. Ideally, a larger frame is beneficial, but as I said earlier, if you're really tall with a large frame, it can be nigh on impossible to fill that out and look full. Whereas somebody like myself, who has possibly a smaller frame, my muscle looks rounder, a bit fuller. It's sort of a bit of a cheat look. It looks like we've got more muscle mass than I do. It's kind of the Lee Priest effect, right? I'm not short, I'm 5'10", but still, my bone structure isn't really wide and massive, so I don't necessarily need to worry about that too much. However, it does mean that if somebody does have a wide structure, look at sebum, and they fill it out, I'm pretty fucked. So this is, I guess, personal preference, and it depends on who you're competing against, and it depends if that big guy can fill out his frame. Not all of them can. And then muscle insertions. Well, yes, once again, that's fairly individual and subjective. Some people believe that a peakier, shorter bicep looks better. Some people believe that a longer bicep insertion looks better. Generally speaking, longer bicep insertions, symmetrical abs, and a larger surface area for chest are all very desirable things. Rounder muscle bellies in the quads, that's always desirable. There are things which, generally speaking, work better. And I'm sure that it's possible for somebody to have a really peaky bicep, with long insertions, but it's just going to be a bit harder. Same way that it's going to be harder for somebody with shorter insertions to look like they have much mass in certain poses, because quite simply, you've got a gap there. So have you done any calculations? You worked out whether you got good or bad genetics? Good. Now let me tell you, you've probably got average to poor genetics. Odds are, look, there are so many factors at play here. The odds of you nailing every single one are slim to none, especially if you're watching this video and you're actually questioning it. In that case, you almost definitely do not have amazing genetics. Now, I'm not saying that's my audience base, because I'm sure some of you do, but it's very rare for somebody to have amazing genetics and not find out pretty damn quickly. Like me, you're probably bang average. You might have a large frame, great muscle insertions, but you might have really shitty health or poor training response, or an average response to anabolics. And so these things tend to level themselves out, and people generally are on a fairly even playing field in terms of some people have this versus that versus that. And yeah, you can ignore stuff like health and just pummel yourself into the ground, but it'll catch up with you, right? So most people have a mixed bag. Chris Bumstead, for fuck's sake, has short bicep insertions, and he's got a genetic disorder to do with his health. So yeah, everyone's got something. In that case, do they matter? Well, how much do they matter? Well, they don't matter as much as most people like to blame them for. To be frank, a lot of this is a mindset issue. People love blaming things they have zero control over, because then it can't be their fault, right? Truth be told, loads of people with bad genetics have made it and have gotten to the top at the top at the top. It just takes a lot more work. Work that most of those people are not willing to put in. But for most people, it doesn't matter. Your genetics do not come into play unless you're a competitive bodybuilder who wants to go really fucking far in this sport. Like, nobody on the street cares. Nobody looks at you and notices your genetics. Honestly, they don't. And in terms of fitness, you can be tiny and still be classified as fit or a bodybuilder or whatever, because most people have no conception of what bodybuilding actually is, the size of it. When I did my first ever cut, people thought I was the fitness guy, and I'm probably about 40 pounds, 50 pounds heavier than I was then. But they are still important, especially if you're considering competitive bodybuilding or becoming enhanced. Your genetic health, for example, could mean you either have to retire early from the sport or you end up in an early grave. Now, the latter of the two doesn't even rely on you being competitive, it just relies on you not being natural. So that's why health is a really important factor, and why the conversations we're having now and the video I just recorded about the recent mortality rates matters. For stuff like insertions, they can easily be overcome. Look at Sebum, he just worked harder, put more mass on them, changed his training approach. These kind of things can slightly overcome genetics. And when you have an amazing physique and one or two tiny weaknesses, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter! However, one thing I will say genetics do really dictate is the ceiling. People like Dorian, people like Jay Cutler, can absolutely work past average genetics. They don't have poor genetics because they wouldn't have gotten to where they got to if that was the case. They can work through average genetics to become Mr. Olympia. However, when somebody with good genetics works hard and puts the same amount of effort in, it's game over. For example, somebody like a Phil Heath or Ronnie was almost destined for the Olympia. They had the perfect mix of genetics. I can't think, other than Ronnie's maybe, his bone structure not able to deal with the training style or whatever it was that caused that, I can't think of one single downside from those guys in terms of their bodybuilding journey. Whereas somebody like, for example, James Hollingshead may have to work harder to overcome those genetic barriers and may have a ceiling of maybe top 3 of the Olympia. Now, how much this comes into play is yet to be seen. Nick Walker, for example, has objectively, apparently, average genetics. I don't think so. I think that he just had a mixed bag and he competed quite early in his journey, so I think that's a poor reflection of his actual genetic capabilities. Yeah, there's the potential that you could win the Olympia, but you need the right circumstances, and nobody with perfect genetics and insane work ethic and all the things that you're putting in, plus the genetics, in order for you to win, because otherwise, of course, naturally, genetics that works hard beats poor genetics that works hard. It's mathematics. This is why it's really important to assess, based on what I've said, how good your genetics are, and assess your ceiling, your potential ceiling within this sport. If, being honest with yourself, you don't really think you could reach top 5 of the Olympia, then there is an argument to be made of why you're doing it. Now, I'm facing this argument myself, and I'm giving myself 2 years to demonstrate to myself what is capable, because if I'm not capable of the growth that I need to see over the next 2 years, I won't be capable of the growth I need to see in the time frame I need to see to remain healthy, otherwise, to get to sort of a competitive pro level. So, I'm giving myself a time limit, and it's important you do too. If you've got, say, average genetics, you think you can make it, but you're not, adamant like, yeah, I've clearly got fucking Mr. Olympia genetics. Maybe you need to limit yourself. You need to give yourself the time, invest it, do everything perfectly, nail everything, and then just see where you land and make an objective decision, because the sport isn't healthy, and even if you have perfect genetic health response, you could still end up in an early grave from this. So it's really, really important that we're honest with ourselves, we don't delude ourselves. The reward for bodybuilding is not that high. And if you're not genetically predisposed to be successful in this sport, chances are you're going to compete against people who are, and they're going to make your life difficult. They're going to push you to up your doses, to be more irresponsible with it, and that's just going to lead you down the bad road. But do not fear. There are ways to make your genetics work for you, even with average genetics. And there are a few simple things that you can do in order to overcome or mask those issues. First of all is intelligent posing. There are some great people who do this, who hide their flaws. Arnold was a major advocate for this. Posing should be used to maximize your strengths and hide your weaknesses. You don't want people to see what you don't want them to see. If you can give them the perfect picture, why wouldn't you? Even if those flaws exist, if you can hide them, they don't play a factor. So the better you are at posing, the more you learn your body, the more you learn angles for poses, how you personally can do them in order to make them look better, the better chance you're going to have. Now, the second way you can do it is not a way that I recommend, but it's compensating. Now, compensating for health could be a good thing, bringing your dosage down or increasing your supplementation of health supplements or ARBs or whatever it is to combat those effects. That's good way of compensating, but there are bad ways of compensating. For example, I have a poor genetic response to PEDs, I'm going to double the dose, or I've got a bad training response, I'm going to bury myself with 1 rep maxes every time, or take myself balls to the wall, or whatever it is. Compensating can work, and you absolutely can overcome some issues, but some issues, the compensation isn't worth it for the price that you pay. If you're going to come away with a net negative from doing this, you solve the issue but you create one twice as big, it's pointless. As I say, the only good compensation is lowering your dosage or increasing your health supplementation. So, genetics are important. Hard work is important. Chances are, if you have amazing genetics, you'd know about it. Most people have average genetics, but using them as an excuse is a cop-out. Everyone almost has average genetics. It's an excuse to get over the fact that you don't have the discipline or the fucking willpower to do what's required to overcome that. Everyone's got barriers in life. Nobody has a perfect run to the top. Don't use genetics as your crutch. You want to be the person who says, yeah, I didn't have the best hand dealt to me, but I fucking overcame it, and I beat people who had better hands dealt to them because they didn't work hard and I did. That's the mentality you have. You don't have a fatalistic, it's pointless because I have bad genetics. Most people who say that kind of shit don't even know because they're so early in their journey, they wouldn't know their genetics, so they slapped them around the fucking face. Give yourself at least 5 years before you even try to make a judgment on this. Stop blaming outside factors and start focusing on what you can control. Go watch my Stoicism video if you want to find out how you can do that, but I'm going to be making a mindset shift video as well, which will be launching over the next couple of weeks, which will explain how you can actually put into practice some Stoic values and how you can shift your mindset from the negative to the positive. Truth be told, you can have the worst genetics in the world, but it doesn't matter, unless your ambition doesn't match your genetics. So I hope this was insightful. There isn't too much information out there about genetics, but it's something that's incredibly focused upon by most people in the industry. So hopefully this gives you some clarity. Do give it a like and subscribe if you did enjoy, and click that bell to be notified because we've got so much content coming to you. As I say, I've got a video coming up on shifting your mindset. So if you're concerned that you don't have very good genetics, let's flip that around, turn the problem on its head, and I'll give you some ways to focus on overcoming them and actually putting your mind to it and achieving it. So like, subscribe, click that bell to be notified, and I'll catch you in the next one.